Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this awesome panel discussion that we'll have where we talk about, well, mainly whatever you would like to hear, because you'll be the ones asking most of the questions. So I am Cristian Macelarul, and I'm so happy to be joined by this unbelievable panel. Clarice Assad is running just slightly late, but she'll be joining us hopefully as well. And I have to tell you a secret, actually, because I didn't realize this way, that we're going to end up in this discussion with actually 7 female composers, and this was not something that we planned, but when I realized this, I realized that maybe subconsciously this had something to do with the fact that I did grow up with 7 sisters, and I feel like home. This is amazing, you know? So this is just, but I'm so happy that you're all here. How many heard the concert last night, just out of curiosity? And I'm assuming we're all coming back tonight I think maybe what would be best just to start, Vivian, if you don't mind, we start and we go this way and just say hi and introduce ourselves and your connection to the festival. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Vivian Fung, and I'll be on the program next Saturday with my earworms, and I'm currently just relocated to the Berkeley area, so a local.
Hi, I'm Nina Young. I had a piece on the concert last night.
Yeah, you did.
Thank you. And this is my first time at Cabrillo, and it's great. And I'm from New York and relocating to Los Angeles.
Hi, I'm Melody Eotvos. I also had a piece on last night, the Sakara Bird. Thank you. And as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm Australian. And this is my first time at the Cabrillo Music Festival.
Hi, I'm Kristin Kuster. I wrote the RBG piece last night. Thank you all for being there last night and for being here today. I actually am on the faculty at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and this is my second year here at Cabrillo.
Hello, my name's Anna Klein, and I have a cello concerto this evening. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah.
My name is Du Yun. I'm from Shanghai, China, but now in New York, and now I'm here.
Hi, my name is Dan Dediu. I'm from Bucharest, Romania, and I will have a piece performed in the concert today.
Very cool. I'm always fascinated by one thing, so I will put the first question, and then hopefully that will give birth to other questions. But I'm always fascinated by the process of composing, because from my point of view in studying scores, and I've said this way too many times this year already, but every composer teaches me how to study their music in a different way. And the idea of finding that way of knowing how to study is what drives us, you know, crazy a little bit, conductors, in trying to understand their music. And I am wondering if it's directly linked, and what I'm referring to, do you always, and this is for anyone on the panel, you can pick up the question, do you always follow the same process with every piece that you write, or does every piece that you write gives you different challenges in how to write the piece itself? Who would like to start?
Not for me. I also have a band, and we do like punk, metal, jazz, and my piece tonight has no jazz element. So each piece for me, I think it should serve for the piece instead of serve for my idea, and this is how I view my life around me. So I made a decision that it should work for the project at hand. And then I'm thinking what makes sense. This is how I treat my world around me, and this is my approach.
Okay. Anybody else?
I agree. I think you have to look at each project differently, and it's sort of like a sculptor sort of getting a piece of clay, and sort of that clay sort of speaks to that sculptor as far as, you know, how to shape it. So it's sort of like you're listening to yourself or listening to some, you know, the piece, and it sort of leads you in that way. And so you're along for the journey. So you're almost like a conduit for the whole process.
And is there a moment, you know, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Michelangelo said that he just had to take away the things that were preventing the sculpture from existing, rather than actually building the sculpture. You know, like, is there an element to that?
Yeah, a lot of it, for me at least, is psychological. Sometimes you get in the way of yourself, you know, you doubt yourself or you censor yourself. And I've learned over the years to, not that it gets any easier, but you learn to trust your instinct a lot more as you go through over and over and over again.
Nina, you were talking the other day about like the actual process of forcing yourself to sit down at the table, right, with a timer until inspiration really got going. Can you?
Well, for me, a lot of the first part of composition, which I think is really fun, is this idea of play. And so I create sort of musical environments for myself to improvise in and hang out at the piano and on the violin and with percussion instruments and the computer and electronics, and just sort of have myself a party and take sounds and experiences from the outside world as well. But then once there's been enough play and you have kind of an idea of what's going to happen, then you have to actually write things on the page, and that's very frightening. And so for me to get focused, I've found recently that and perhaps this has to do with the digital age of technology, where we're so torn in multiple directions. If I'm sitting down for 15 or 20 minutes, I get very easily distracted, and after the 90-minute mark of forcing myself to sit down, then I find a moment of clarity where I become re-obsessed with the idea.
So it brings focus a little bit, this 90 minutes.
Yeah, there's something that happens, you know, sometimes it's at 75 minutes, sometimes it's at 48 minutes.
Wow.
But to guarantee that I can really dive into what I'm involved with. And I think that's a big thing, you know, like in sound, in music, we're asking everybody to take the commitment to sit with us in the concert hall and go on this sonic journey. So I have to be very committed to that journey, and if I'm going to ask other people to participate in it.
Kristi, you were saying something yesterday about taking Megan's poetry and then walking around the yard with it, and I found it really insightful, this, because so much of your music has this unbelievable strong pulse, you know, and I'm wondering if it's related. Like, do you actually come up with a pulse as you're walking? Like, does your walking pace change based on what you're thinking about, or is that just a purely meditative state?
Yeah, my walking pace changes depending on how much sleep I've had the night before. I do a lot of pacing. I do months of pacing, and our house is in the shape of an L. Sort of these two wings to it, and so when it's not walkable outside, as it is much of the time in Michigan, I walk the L, and sometimes make little 8s around the living room and stuff. But I just love pulse. Yeah, and I don't know if that's because I grew up in the 80s, listening to a lot of Madonna, a lot of early Michael Jackson. But I think that's probably a lot of it. And also growing up as a pianist, you know, having your hands do a lot of rhythmic stuff. But yeah, the pacing, I think, is this kind of meditative thing. I think it's basically the same as you know, being present in your artistic space for however long it is. I just walk and walk and walk until, oh, sorry, that was loud. Sorry, until I start to feel something happening.
Anna, I'm always fascinated because when it comes to pulse, I feel like your music has this unbelievable patience that's built into it, you know, and it has a very, very clear sense of pulse. But in some ways, your pulse, when you are in the most patient moments, it reveals itself versus when you try to impose it. You know what I mean? And how do you think about pulse? I'm curious.
I guess that's a good question. Well, part of the process is I always start at the piano to find an idea, and then I use the computer as a compositional tool. But I have a pair of wireless headphones, and I always, once I've got about a minute down, I'll go away from the computer and imagine that I can dance, which I can't. But I guess I think about the physicality of the music, so nothing's ever completely rigid, but there's sort of suspensions or sort of off-kilter. So I think if it feels right to move to, then it will feel good to experience it.
Well, and that's so fascinating that you say that, because for me, I always feel like I'm not getting the right pulse in your music when it doesn't feel good in my hands. You know, it's really strange, because with different music, you know, it's not about how it feels in my hands, but with you, one thing that I found out is if it feels a little awkward in my hands, you will tell me that's not the right speed or not the right pulse. And then I kind of have to rely on feeling like I'm dancing a little bit. You know, so I never made that connection. That's fascinating. Really cool. I'm going to have to go home and think about how I'm conducting the concerto tonight. Just to see this. Melody, what's your process?
For composing?
Yeah.
Okay. I've gone through a bit of a roller coaster with how I compose, because when I first went to my undergraduate, I was kind of beaten over the head very, very strictly to diminish my dreams of becoming a film composer. Mm. And I was told to go and listen to solo clarinet music and really try and engage with contemporary music more, which I did, and I loved it. But then for me, it was coming back to that once I stopped learning from older composers, that I did what I wanted. And so my process became a lot more intuitive after that, which I loved. Like it made so much more sense than trying to map out everything and stick to a plan, which I do not do at all. Yeah.
Yeah, it is very original, you know, what you write, but I do also love in your music that I always feel like, you know, in the back of your mind, you know exactly what someone else would have done. You know what I mean? At the moment, like there's a old world maturity that I find associated with your music, that it's really interesting and beautiful, you know, so the gestures feel really, it's just like they've always been there, but somehow you just make them your own, you know, so I really love that about your music. Don, you had, so for Don's piece tonight, and I showed the orchestra the picture of the map. Don took the map of, well, do you want to talk about it rather than me saying?
Yes, it is one of the possible interpretations. I have given more directions in order to comment on my piece, but especially because we are talking about the compositional process, I think composition is connected to life. To be a composer is not a 8-hour job, and you are either 24 hours composer or not. I mean, the writing down of the score, it's only the last stage of the compositional process, because the inspiration can come from anything, from an intonation of a person, from the rhythm. Of course, it's an anecdotal beginning of the Fifth Symphony by Beethoven, but something real, I think, there was there. Or a combination of sounds or something. So I think you have to collect all these details. Myself, I'm doing this. I have sketchbooks where I'm connecting different details. I don't know for what, but sometime I will use them. Or if I'm not using them, there are increasing my critical mass of finding material, finding ideas, and finding myself, because we express ourselves in our music.
Beautiful. Well, I would love for you to have a chance to ask any questions that we have. If you have something, please, we have microphones. So, Sienna, would you?
Thank you for what we experienced last night, and I look forward to everything. We've been coming to this festival for probably 25 years, and I have withheld this question because it seems not very smart. So, to any of you, I don't understand how you know when you need a tuba. Do you get the gist of my question? I'm just amazed.
Well, I don't think any of us really know when we need a tuba, but
I think you always know when you need a tuba.
well,
You know, it's just the look of it, and also I have a friend who's an amazing tuba player, and we're joking about, you know, like tuba is such like a B-roll film, and you know, you either can be really, really good at it, or you sort of like look silly in the orchestra. So I think for the task of a composer in today's world is sort of like, you know, looking into the eye of set problems and be like, what if we can challenge that status quo? And that, be it tuba, be it oboe, be it flute, be it a violin. So I think this is the new technique that all of us are trying to employ and trying to experiment.
yeah, I think part of the part of your question as well is how do we decide what instruments play what? And I think for different composers this can be different. I will just say a couple of words and then please chime in. I think some composers notate. The art of composition is the notation of sounds, right? And then the creation of gestures within those sounds. This is the way that I think of it. I think that then there's a step further to that, which is the art of orchestration, which is when you assign those sounds to different people to perform based on the timbre and the character and the colors that you're trying to portray. So this, in some way, are how those decisions are being made. At least this is the way that I think of it, but please feel free to contradict or agree, or add, or subtract.
I think a lot of instruments, or all instruments in the orchestra, have cultural weight depending on how much you have listened to them or worked with them. They mean different things. You know, trumpets have a hunting call and such. And so you have that sort of cultural tool bank accessible if you've been part of that tradition. But then there's also, I really like the idea of the chimera, or sort of the proto-instruments that you can build together by combining the qualities of unlike instruments and creating different sounds. So it's sort of using the orchestra as a giant resonant body and a synthesizer with all of these different waveforms and combining them together to see what could come out next.
Yeah, I will second that. Thinking in terms of the orchestra as a single instrument, but just with 1,000 more dimensions to it. I mean, it's hard to say the clarinet is a single dimension instrument because it isn't. In itself, it has so many possibilities, but you take the orchestra and then suddenly that's just completely blown out of proportion, and approaching it like that, yeah, definitely has a lot more success, I find, than sticking to the Rimsky-Korsakov like orchestration method, which I love as well. But yeah.
There's also, you know, a purely practical element, because as a composer, I think when you receive a commission to write a piece, one of the very first things that you're told is the instruments that you can use. And I think sometimes it's actually even encouraged that you have to use all those instruments, you know, so that exactly. So then it in some ways it's decided for you what canvas you have, but then you still get to choose when you use the paint, right? Or at what color it is. So sometimes the canvas is decided for you in advance. It depends on the commission or the limitations of the practical aspects of how many people are around available to perform the piece and so on.
But I think, being a unique, quote unquote, a composer with your own personal voice,
Yes.
Is that you're always trying to fight against the textbook of the orchestration. And, they often see oboe can never really blend with the orchestra. But from where I come from, or the oboes from the Shanama and from the Persia era, like it's supposed to be loud. And then why you have to hide it? That's a very Western side of idea that everything should blend well. But if your project, if your work is not dealing with that, and it should not conform to that concept, to that aesthetic. So that's something that I think that as an audience we can also have open our idea of. It maybe some pieces, it doesn't mean it needs to really blend well.
Right.
And for some people, it doesn't work that way. Yeah.
Yes, and I go a little bit farther. Composition is about creating contexts, with sonorities. So there is a traditional way to employ the instruments. We all know from the conservatories, from University of Music and so on, from our teachers. And there are new ways in order to invent with the same tuba a new context where the tuba doesn't sound like a fat guy, a little bit drunk, and like a Falstaff, for instance, but could be imagined by a composer in order to be a Prince Charming. Who knows? I don't know, but it is possible. It depends on context.
Beautiful, beautiful. There was one other question here. I think the microphone is coming.
Kristi, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about your creative process when the works come to you or when you commission the works.
Is this to me, Kristi, or this?
It's you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's you.
So about, can you repeat the question about the creative?
Yeah, so how do you approach your creative process when you're dealing with these very different works that come to you that we hear?
Well, the first thing that I do in deciding, first of all, what the pieces are that are on any given season, is I kind of just sort of let it speak to me, and sometimes it all falls into place as a thematic thing or as things that go well together in a conversation. I would say to pick those pieces, I usually listen to a lot of music. And sometimes I'm really drawn to a piece. Like Duyon and I, we never met before. We've never collaborated before. But I heard about Kraken just having conducted in Detroit, and musicians talked to me about it. And then I went and I listened, and I was like, I have to do this piece. And you will hear why tonight. So a lot of the time, I try to keep my ears open, and I just listen to everything that comes my way. I really do. And then from that, I try, I find one thing that I really want to do, and then I try to see what else goes with that. Or if we commission something, there are a lot of moving parts to a commission. This is just because this is the most recent one that you heard. It actually started with a pure Facebook post that Jamie Barton made. She was very upset about what was happening about 3 years ago in our country, and she made a statement about this. And I wrote her back. We had just worked doing an opera together. And I wrote her back and I said, you know what, I have a place where if you want to use your artistic voice to make a statement about that, we can talk about it and make it happen. And she said, yes, let's do it. And then that led to us, to me looking at what would that statement be? How can that be? And then, RBG came to mind as a direct representation of my own search as a father to try to find real heroes that I can give my kids, and real people that we can celebrate their achievements in creating a better society for all of us. And then that led to finding Kristin and talking to her, and then she said, you know what, I know exactly the right person that should write the libretto, and then she brought Megan on board. And then, so all of this happened this way, and then the piece happened last night. So in some ways this was the creative process behind that piece. But I do have to say, every piece is different. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that when I try to limit myself in having to follow a pattern, I'm never successful. Especially with new music, I think you have to be open to allowing everyone to say what they want to say. And then if it works for what we are doing here, by all means we will do it. And if it doesn't work, maybe we have to wait a year or two. So this is the way that I think of it. And in some ways, it probably drives a lot of composers mad, because I never write back. I mean, a lot of them write me to suggest things that they're doing or to let me know about it. And poor Ellen knows this, because I never write back and I say, no, I'm not interested. I'm always interested, but I just have not found the place yet to say yes. So it's some people, their process is different. For me, it's always yes. The time is when I get in trouble. When it's not enough time.
May I add that this process that you're talking about we're so thankful, all of us. I think I'm speaking for all the composers here, that we're so thankful about your curiosity and your humility in actually listening to, first of all, just listening to all of our works, because I think that is still quite rare to have a conductor who is so interested in new music that he takes the time to listen. So thank you so much for that.
Well, I have a lot of long flights, and I just... But it's fascinating. Like I look at, and this is why I can't say no, because the process of composing, it's such a personal, deeply intimate thing. Like, how can you say no to that? Like, if someone reveals a part of themselves, of who they are, they've put it in a composition and they've sent it to you as a letter, how can you not open that letter? I find it insulting on a human level, and just because I can't find the place to perform it right away, it doesn't mean that it's not something that I cherish. In fact, my dream, and both Cheryl, my wife, and my manager joke about the fact that my dream, like this is my honest dream, is to write back to every composer that has written me. This is my personal, and she says that on my tombstone. She's just going to say, he wrote composers back.
But I just wanted to add that, sometimes composer write a piece, and to be able to bring alive, not only that you have to have the musician, but also the producing part of it. Last night, I had tears in my eyes when I saw it was on the video. I really did. I'm not talking about the politics, because I'm an immigrant. I'm a late immigrant. I do not understand the difference between republics and Democrats. Yeah, because for me they could be the same thing, right? So and then you understand, what? But what I'm trying to say is, for a lot of countries, this is why, like, Americans still to this day, whatever people say, I always think that it still can have that aspirational aspect. This nation still could have that, because when you have leaders like that, and take the time to, because I go to a lot of places, and not just China, just like there's so many corrupt government, working in today's world. And they really, and even if they say they care about the art, they don't. It's always about the soft power to what make the government really work. You know, just to see some leader could, you know, do that and was really talking about the women and about a women composer and wanted to do more of that. Like, I just was like, I just thought I'm a very proud immigrant. So thank you so much for producing that. You know, that's also part of our audience reaction. And I was an audience, so thank you. Thank you to the Cabrillo Festival.
Question, yes. Oh, please.
I'll pass the mic. Kind of building off that statement that composing and creating artistically is so vulnerable, I'm curious if anyone has experienced imposter syndrome and how you've dealt with that in your professional career.
Who would like to start?
Yes, all the time, and particularly when starting, I think it's, well, I perhaps it's at all phases of the project, but like when starting a new piece, I always can't remember how it could possibly have been me that wrote the previous one, and I think that I don't know how that happened. And in some way, in the middle of the piece, you doubt everything, and at the end of the piece, you have no more control over it. You have to give it to someone, and then you're just like, well, this is garbage, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But I also think, like, as an artist, if you're not questioning yourself all the time, you should go and ask yourself some questions.
You know, I'm actually going to answer it in a way from my perspective for just a brief second, because I almost love nothing more, and I search for this. I look in every new piece to find what is the link to everything that has come before. And this obsesses me as an artist because it makes me feel like I've understood where I love knowing where things have come from, because I'm a strong believer that art doesn't get born in a vacuum, you know. And we're all using the exact same notes that Bach and Mozart did, well, with some exceptions, I think, in terms of the extended techniques. In terms of the extended techniques and things like this. But, you know, so I'm always fascinated, and to me, it's a really great sort of compliment when I can, compliment to the composer when I can hang on to, ooh, this gesture, I recognize this gesture from 150 years before, but you've made it your own, you know? So maybe I look at it as a benefit or something that validates a little bit your own voice in having been able to deal with it in your own personal way, you know? So I love that, actually. I like being able to hang on to things as they appear. Just 1 second, we need the microphone so that everyone can hear. There's a question in the front.
Thank you. Creative writers often talk about periods in their writing where a character will begin to take over the story, and that creates an interesting tension. Should the writer be led by this character who in some sense knows more about this story than they do, or do they need to rein in the character and not get carried away by the character? Is there anything analogous to that happens in any of your composing?
Yes, I think so. Music is the same. I mean, on the under language level, the fluxus, the fluid, it's sort of same like writing a novel, because there is a certain point from where the composer doesn't have the same control like in the beginning. So let's say the characters of the music, or the themes, no? Or if it's music without themes, then the colors and something, the form, let's say, has its own will. And you cannot go against the music. You have to feel it and to go for it in order to sense the meaning of it. This is something very special, and that's why I think it's a fascinating work in the compositional process. And to answer to the other question, I think one of the possibilities is to write it down very quickly, to compose in a fast tempo. If you know what you if you have all your sketches or your preparation, like cooking a meal, no? So for my music, I'm a fast writer. I'm writing very fast. A piece, if I know what I'm doing there and what the material is, the form and so on, so I let myself, like surfing in the on the wave of composition, and surf. In 10 days, a symphonic piece could be done. Yes, I mean, by hand.
That does not happen in my house.
Okay.
Does anyone want to come back to the question about the literary?
I kind of do. I'm highly susceptible to literary inspiration. And for about 3 years, when I first came to the States actually to study, I was obsessed with The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers and its psychological horror. And they're short stories, and I started writing music based on them, and I couldn't stop. And the music took on the character of, I guess, how I felt about the environment within the book and within the stories and how they all linked, to the point where I'm like, okay, now I'm becoming one of these people in the book that can't escape it. Like, once you have read, it's a fictional play called The King in Yellow, and everyone in the book, the characters are exposed to it, and something ridiculously horrible happens to them. Sorry, excuse me. But it gets into your head and you can't stop thinking about it. So I kind of felt like that had happened to me, to the point where my teachers were getting annoyed with me. Like, it was like, why are you still writing about this? And it was really interesting. And just at the beginning of this year, I actually came back to those stories to see what would happen. And I wrote a chamber piece based on one of the stories in there again. And I could get straight back into it. Like, it sounded completely different from everything else I'm doing right now. And I thought that was really interesting. So it's a fantastic question and highly relevant.
There was another. Wonderful.
I'm very happy about the number of female composers here, and I wanted to ask them, you if there's any old girls network of mentorship.
Any what?
Old girls network.
Old girls.
All girls.
Like old boys network, old girls network.
Oh, I think I'm the oldest one here.
Should we form one right now?
Yeah, maybe this is it. This is it. I don't think so. And here's why. Because so I'm 46 years old. I just turned 46 in June.
Yeah.
And you too?
No, just sharing.
She was just happy for you.
That I lasted this long. And I learned, so I was in graduate school in the late 90s and early 2000s, and there were very, very few women composers that came through for things like seminars and even performances. I think I calculated the other day that I was 32 was how old I was by the time I actually watched a female composer walk across an orchestra stage and take a bow. Wow. Which is, I know, it's astonishing. Well, sorry, it is to me, but, and so I have not had a single female mentor composer. I am now at the University of Michigan. Our department was founded in 1949, and I'm the second ever woman to have tenure in that department, and the first one left, and then I was hired after she left. So it's a thing. It's a big thing. But the generation, I think, older than me, like in their mid-50s and then on, and older than that, they grew up in much more of a culture of don't talk about it. Do your thing, keep your head down, power through. You're the same as the men. Don't draw attention to the fact that you're a woman. Some of them speak up about it now, some of them don't. But what I will say is I think that generation is doing a lot of really quiet work behind the scenes. I know several of them make a conscious effort to consistently recommend young composers who identify as female or young composers of color in ways that just weren't happening even 10, 20 years ago. So I'm also really encouraged by the fact that what I'm seeing a trend in our youngest students is that they're having none of this. I mean, they are, yeah, they really are. And I think particularly in universities, it's becoming talked about much more. People are openly discussing it. People are, I mean, these youngsters, they don't have time for this crap. They don't have time for discrimination. They don't want to see any of it. They want to, make sure that equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big kind of buzzword in academia right now anyway. And it's kind of BS unless you're actually going to do the work to change the numbers. And so I'm excited. I think that a lot of our young people are going to really do amazing things. And my hope is that those of us who are ever in any kind of position of power who can offer opportunities and access to those voices that not only need support, but they need amplification, that's our job to do. And we need to do better at it and do more of it.
It matters who you know.
Say again?
It matters who you know. Connections.
No.
Doesn't it?
I'm sorry that I'm cutting there, but
Okay.
no. But please continue.
Yes and no. I mean, I think less so than it used to. 20 years ago, we were all told, hey, you want to write orchestra music, you got to go find that guy, hang out with that guy, study with that guy. You want to write band music, you got to move to Texas. You want to write film music, you got to move to LA. There was like 4 paths that one could take. And I think that the internet has had a big role in changing that significantly. I mean, if I wanted to learn about Ghanaian drumming as a doctoral student, I had to get on a plane and go there. But now the dissemination of information is so rapid and so vast and wonderful that I think young composers can have any kind of sort of circuitous path in their careers that they want. They can have toes in all different kinds of genres, all different kinds of aesthetics and projects. It's really wonderful. So in that sense, I think it's a lot less that now than it used to be.
I had a knee-jerk reaction to when I said the thing, because just a couple decades ago, a few years ago, men would actually use that to say, oh, if you hang out with me, you're gonna go somewhere, right? So
yeah, some of them still try too. Right.
Women included.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not just this gender thing. Right. It's just this human exploiting thing. And I also wanted to make sure that I want to make sure. It's also like on the curator part of job too, that we have to know that this is what Kristin, you were saying, that make sure that we are always open the time. It's not about who you hang out with more. It's really about the curiosity. And not just thinking that we have done a good job, because right now we're still not doing a good job when you think about that like worldwide wise. Women are not encouraged to even play music in many places in the world. And we know those places, and we pretend that's not happening. And we say, oh, women are doing an incredible job. No, we're talking about, in the West Coast and East Coast of the United States. No, we're not doing a good job, and we could continue to do a good job. And our younger generation will go to those places and say, let's talk together. Do you, like, when you look at China now, the economy is doing so good, but if you were talking about feminism still today, you're not encouraged to talk about that, and you'll get a backlash from women as well. So, but understanding all those danger and then perhaps being banned, and how you work with that, and how you talk
with a younger generation of women composers and women artists from that region, and say this because our model of how things might work in the United States perhaps not going to work there. So when we're doing all those sorts of job, we have to understand the sensitivities of the social balances and all that. And then you really look into the problem of the nature of the problem is when we're talking about we're interested in knowing voices from women, we actually wanted to hear different interpretation of the life experiences. It's not just checking the boxes. Okay, I'm done.
I want to.
Thank you.
I want to. Sorry.
And I just want to follow up very quickly on this because I think the first step, yes, is to have a better inclusion of everyone. But the next step is to actually allow them to talk about the things that are perhaps still viewed uncomfortable by other people. So, we were just having a discussion right before we came here because I will be curious. I am so happy that we were able to, and with the generous support from many of you, to be able to create this piece about RBG. I'm really curious to see how many orchestras that are trying to put on this persona that they are addressing the issue, how many of them will actually feel comfortable performing the piece? That actually talks so directly and so perfectly to the point of what they should be talking about. And teaching their audience about the fact that, equality is important and people have been fighting for it, for generations. And without those, we would have been so much worse. So that is the first step, I think, in inviting a more equal group of people to discuss, but then letting them talk about what they say, rather than putting them in a mold and saying, okay, we're going to represent the female composer, but of a piece that doesn't actually address anything that we feel uncomfortable with. You see what I mean? So I think the true feminism, should actually look beyond that and look at the message as well that is being provided. That is very important.
I think it's really important that we actively continue the dialogue, because I think only with dialogue and openness can we really come to an understanding of what it means to have the diversity, inclusion, and equity. I echo what Christy was saying about, I'm of the same generation as Christy, and I was, there were maybe 5 female composers out of 40 in my school. And, I grew up with my teacher saying in front of a public panel, Vivian, you're going to either become a really good composer or you're going to make babies. You're going to have to choose between the two. So, and this was a public forum. And so, it laid the groundwork for me to actually believe that, okay, it's an either-or situation. And now I think, having a family now, I really make a point of addressing that to whenever I have a chance to say that work-life balance is very important, and it actually, in my case, really added to my creative life to have a child. And so, but without talking about these things, those kind of stigmas would never be really dispelled, and we really must actively talk about it and also address it in our works too. I think it's an ongoing thing. It's not going to be resolved overnight.
Absolutely. Okay. Sorry, we've had so many hands. I hope we get to all of you.
Yeah.
Christy, are the compositions sent to you in a digital form so that you can hear them?
Yes, I accept all digital forms of compositions, yes.
Okay, thank you. And Kristin, my major question was for you. I thought your piece was a masterpiece.
I'm sorry?
I think your piece is a masterpiece, one of the greatest things that the Cabrillo Music Festival has done.
Thank you.
And I've been to most of the seasons.
Thank you.
An important piece also, the importance of it. But as a choral singer and a musician myself, I was really struck by the fact how many groups can perform this thing. Will you always need the room full of teeth to do it? Because that's a very unique group.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised.
And the other thing is your voice leading in the voices is really amazing to me because I could see nothing really standard in it. It's like the soprano sometimes jumps way down, and does these huge leaps. So how are you choosing all those notes and those sonorities? It's really amazing to me. That was one of the most amazing things as I heard it.
Thank you. I will say that I was obsessed for probably about a decade with Heinrich Schütz. If you don't know his music, check it out, SCHU umlaut TZ, who's a precursor to Bach. With voice leading is all the things in his music. And then honestly, I'm just trying to write what I think is going to sound cool. So I often choose chords and things and then figure out how to get there within each voice so that it's not super awkward. But I also just love giant leaps. I also love things like instruments or voices that are typically high singing low, which is why Jamie had a lot of low notes last night. I just love that. I love low flutes. Like flutes playing around middle C is just super yummy, I think. So, yeah.
We had some questions here in the front to Sienna, if we have Max.
Yeah, so I'm always fascinated by the process in which you're creating sounds, but you don't really hear them. And I'm trying to figure out how much you hear in your head. I know, and how well. And I know that at this point you can reproduce some of it digitally or call your friends and have them play parts. But just to finish the question, I'm really intrigued by when the orchestra plays it, how surprised are you? Is that a whole process in and of itself?
Anna, you're quiet.
It's a really interesting question. I think there are always some surprises, and I think as a composer you want to try out new things with each piece. But I think you have a general sense, but I think it's really fun to put some sounds that you're not sure about, and that's I would love to explore more of that. Diana, I'm curious about you.
I'm curious about myself too. I think it's always sort of like you have this perfect idea of relationship, what that could be, and then you walk in, you see that perfect person show up, and that perfect person, it's like fulfill everything that you had the most romantic, grand idea, and when that person is a real life and a vivid, and that's the first hit that it goes into this sound, you're like, oh my God, I'm falling in love. And especially if you're working with opera stuff, you're living with the story for so long, and then you're like, when they sing, when people voice sing, you just want to die a little. And I think this kind of transcendence and is something that I really go for, because it's not about the total control. It's about the submission to things that are unknown, and it's grander than you. And this is what I meant by earlier, that this idea of the most beloved, and this in a lot of religions, they talk about this higher calling for the beloved and this thing. So music in many cultures, it's only as a pathway to the high calling. And somehow we a little bit lost that. But what if we go back to that? That'd be lovely, isn't it?
There's a question right next to you.
Hi, my 16-year-old son just had to go to work, but he wanted me to ask a question for him, if I might. He is a beginning composer, and so he wanted advice that you have for a beginner who's still in high school, either technical or inspirational. And then the second part of his question was, how do you write for an instrument you don't play?
Actually, if I could answer the second part first. Last year on this very panel, do you remember what Bill Bolcom said about this? I was surprised. So William Bolcom is one of my former mentors, and on this panel he got a similar question about writing for instruments that he doesn't like. And I learned that day that evidently he doesn't like the clarinet, which I thought was shocking because he writes so well for it and so beautifully. And he said his answer, which I loved and which I now do, is that he thinks about a person that he loves who plays the clarinet.
Yes.
And then he's able to do it. So.
And practical advice, I guess, for someone that is starting as a composer? Anyone would like to?
Well, I guess bouncing off that comment, I think is you learn so much from your friends when you're starting out. The best thing is if you're writing for the clarinet for the first time, to find a clarinetist that you can try things out. I think for most of us that's probably been the case. So your friends are your best teachers, really.
My advice will be to read books and to make a general culture. Because a composer without culture, taste, imagination, one cannot imagine.
And I would say listen to a lot of different kinds of music, even things that you don't like, and form opinions about them. I think is important. Go to concerts and meet musicians and composers that way. Encourage them to come to the Cabrillo Festival. Yeah. Listening to a lot of different kinds of music, I think, is really healthy.
I mean, I'm not. One of the things that I loved doing whenever I started studying music, and this actually really helped me understand a little bit, is I would take music that was already written and just copy it and rewrite it myself. Because actually I love having that relationship with a piece of paper and a pen where I see what it feels like to do that. And I think it makes me feel like I'm connected to Beethoven if I just transcribe the symphony. Maybe I'm just, weird and I need help. But I think there's an element of feeling connected to that while you have to put down all those things. And I don't know, I would think that would be something that would help someone that tries to learn how to write music, because in a way it's like you're talking to, how did you write this? Well, let me see. And then you do it this way.
I should make my student do that,
There you
especially
go.
the freshman year, because if you're looking at the traditional training, by understanding how the master work is actually, you have to just repeat after them again and again and again. There's no score, you just repeat after them to year in and year out until they say, okay, now you can do your own thing, right? So when you look at the visual artists too, that the fundamental of painting is actually to take stencils. Mm-hmm. So that kind of is a fundamental skill of building, and then forget about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and then have fun with your performer friends and have crush with people who.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of believing that you can't break a rule that you have not mastered, right? So the first step is to understand the rule and why it exists, and then break it. That's where genius happens. Yeah. Well, this is all the time that we've had for today. I'm so encouraged by seeing that there are a lot more questions left for next year. Thank you very much. See you tonight.